Good day, family. Thanks for joining us for this Wednesday conversation. We started this last year during COVID time. We had a couple persons, Dr. Chantel Brown, who is one of our members, and one of our local pharmacists and entrepreneur, founder of Hope Pharmacy. She was here last year talking to us about COVID vaccinations and the importance of it. And then we also had Dr. Jessica Young Brown and Reverend Marvin Gilliam, who is a pastor of Mount Carmel Baptist Church, and Dr. Jessica Young Brown, who you guys just heard from on Sunday. If you tuned in at 3:00, for our memorial service of remembrance. Dr. Brown is one of our two. As I bragged about in church a couple of weeks ago, we got two of the greater voices in our area, persons who seek to help people be better, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And we're going to hear from the second one in a second. But prayerfully, our conversations last year and then hopefully the one today will help you during this season. And I know a season of celebration here at 6 Mile Zion, we're focusing on a season of Advent, the coming of the Christ, and not just on Christmas and Santa and the elves and all that good stuff. But during this season, just as much as many are happy, there are many who struggle, and grief is a very real part of this season, this last part of the year. So we have a resident expert here today to help us with some of that. Charlie Pleasant is what she's known as, is a voice in our region, and we're excited that she's a part of our 6 Mile Zion Baptist Church family. I'm gonna let her tell you about herself, and after you hear about herself, I'm gonna ask her a couple of questions, and hopefully our conversation today, for these few minutes that we have, will help you be better during the season. So thank you, ma'am, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
6 Mile Zion Baptist Church, Bible study crowd primarily. I'm certain some friends and families are here with us now. Why don't you tell them who you are and what you do, and then I'll shoot a couple questions at you.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Sharnessa Pleasant. I go by Charlie. I am a licensed clinical social worker here in the Richmond, Virginia area. My organization is called the Healing Collaborative, but starting January 1st of 2023, that will then be known as the Pleasant Clinical and Consulting Company. We are looking to expand services and things that we're offering in the realm of mental health and wellness. So I'm really excited about that. Born and raised Richmond, Virginia. Graduated from Henrico High School. Um, Returned back to the area back in 2019 after being gone for 17 years. Yeah, so I'm still kind of getting reacclimated to this Richmond. Yeah.
Yeah, New Richmond.
Mhm.
This is the new. They don't even call it Richmond anymore. They call it RVA.
I'm
That's
from
it.
Richmond.
Right, RVA. So where were you doing that 17 years?
17 years. So I graduated from VCU in 2001. Was in political science and women's studies. I wanted is really interesting. I wanted to pursue a career in politics.
Okay.
I actually interned for John Warner when I was in at VCU, and when I graduated, I knew I wanted to go back to graduate school. I wanted to look into politics, and it was during this time. There was a really interesting thing that was happening out in Detroit with a very young black mayor that was taking office, Kwame Kilpatrick, right? And so I remember,
who is now a pastor.
yes, who is now a pastor,
Yeah,
and if anybody knows that story, you can kind of see how he matriculated to that part of his life. But I remember sitting at home during that time. I was actually working for the EEOC. I had a chance to work under the late Roxy Cornegay. She was a really big figure here in Richmond in Republican politics and was a mentor of mine. And she was just like, go for it. She wouldn't actually, I went up for a position with the EEOC, got the position, and she wouldn't hire me.
Oh, wow.
And she told me, she was just like, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be doing something else.
Wow.
And so that's when I actually put in this application for a small liberal arts college in Michigan, which is not too far from the University of Michigan. Went out there, thought I was going to do 2.5 years of graduate school, and it ended up turning to almost 13 years.
Wow.
So working in institutions of higher education, worked at the University of Michigan, worked at Eastern Michigan University, where I actually went to school for my social work degree.
Okay.
And it was just time to come home. My husband and I, we reconnected. He is retired Air Force. We reconnected, and anybody that knows the life of a person that's in the military, you're pretty much going to them. So that's just kind of how that happened. Yeah.
Well, that's so I've learned some things. So that's good. On air, I'm learning live. And so we had to talk about the Kilpatrick piece offline, but that's
fun time.
Yeah, I can imagine. So a couple questions. So many people hear the word grief. The word grief is it's just a huge word that looms over society and in our culture. And a lot of times people ascribe the word grief, but there's so much that goes with it. I mean, there are phases of it. Can you just talk about grief in general? I mean, if you want to touch on the phases, great. But what is grief?
Okay, so I can start a little bit with the phases of grief, and it has evolved over time. Just throughout the mental health world, but a lot of people know grief to be in the stages of denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance, and depression, and that's out of order. And it's come to evolve to talk about the processing of grief, the celebration of a person's life. So it's a lot more expansive than what I was clinically trained in at the time when we were talking about grief. But grief in and of itself is not a linear process. You can go through any of those stages at any point. And one day you may feel completely fine. You're handling life. The day feels good. The next day you're on the floor and you can't figure out why. You are crying and you can't figure out why. Grief is, I like to tell a lot of my clients that grief is not something that you come to therapy to heal from. Grief is actually an appropriate response to a loss. It is actually to be experienced the way that it is. And it speaks to the magnitude of the relationship that you may have had with the person when they were here in the physical world, or the lack of relationship that you might have had with that person, because grief can come to you even if you were disconnected from a person while they were here. Once they pass, you can still feel grief about the loss of a fantasy of that relationship. Things didn't materialize in the way that you would have wanted those things to materialize. Right. So it can kind of go both ways. But the process of grief is very, very loopy. and it's okay to feel all of the emotions that come with it.
So grief is a response to.
Yes.
Okay, grief is a response to. So, so someone who may be feeling lonely during the holiday season because they're not in relationship with somebody is not grieving. That's another process.
No, that's still grief.
Okay.
Because
okay.
because we're assuming that they don't want to be in relationship with those people or persons,
Mhm.
or there might have been some type of relational rupture that happened. And by that I mean just an injury in the relationship with that person that caused them not to be together,
Okay.
whether that be a family member, a romantic partner, a child, any type of relationship. A person that might be feeling lonely during the holiday could also be on the side of having lost a great deal of family members. And we see this a lot with our older populations when they've seen their friends, their families, their parents, their significant others pass along. And they're some of the remaining people that are here that are feeling really lonely because life as they've known it for all of these years is significantly different because the people that they grew up with aren't here anymore. So it can look a lot different for various people.
So how can we um how can we in, and maybe encourage is not the right word. How do we can we empower people to think about ways that they can deal with their grief, um, maybe in a way that's so let's say you lost a loved one, or what are some ways that you can maybe embrace a legacy during the holidays, or how are some ways that you can uh, not just look at what you lost, but also is there a way to have your grief help you investigate maybe what you gained by being in a relationship? I don't. That may have been a strange way to ask that question.
No, I'll see if I think I might hear what you're saying. I think a lot of that, as far as embracing what can be what's left or what remains after a person leaves here with us physically, depends upon where you are in your grief process. If for a lot of people and a lot of clients that I work with, the first year of having a significant person lost in your life feels completely numbing because you're experiencing a lot of firsts. They are not there for the birthdays. They are not there for the holidays. They are not there for a lot of these things that they have been there for the entirety of your life. So that for I've had it described to me as the first year is just kind of being offline. Like I'm here, but I'm really not here, which makes sense because you're still moving through just accepting this person not being anywhere. Just a sidebar to that, I remember when my grandma passed away in 2019, I had moments where I could not believe the world didn't stop because of my loss. Like, why is everybody moving when I'm hurting as bad as I'm hurting over here, right? Um, and so it just really depends on when you are in your grief process. That first year can feel really numbing. The second year is when people start to kind of look around and maybe start getting a little bit of sense of themselves again and really finding out, and this is the part that can feel really difficult, is that they're having to redefine a new normal. And for a lot of people, that's really, really difficult. So it'll be really hard to talk about embracing a legacy when I can't even accept that you're not here anymore. So as you're working through the acceptance of and the processing of the loss of that person, you can then begin to remember the great things that that person left you here, or the hard lessons. Because I never want to leave that crowd out. During the holidays as well too, we assume that grief only happens to people or is only experienced by folks that were in deep love or deep admiration, but there are some people have really tough relationships with folks. And when those folks leave here with things being unanswered, things not being said, things not being explained, that's its own type of wound in and of itself.
Let's try to peel back some of what you just said, that last part of it, because there are some intricacies that come with grief that, as you say, are not always associated with the positive moments. There are, there are unresolved issues, estranged. I always, and I know some of our older members may not know exactly what I'm talking about, but when Takeoff, Migos died,
Yeah, yeah.
and just thinking about, and I think him and Offset, yes, or Quavo, whichever one.
The one you talking
Yeah.
about his uncle?
Yeah.
Quavo.
So they weren't talking. I mean,
Yes.
they weren't, allegedly, from what we understand. My heart went out to the uncle who lost the nephew who was estranged for whatever reason. Because it could have been, and that the point of what the reason was is not the focus. It is, there are times when there are things that happen that keep us apart, that in the big scope of things, if we only knew, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
then something happens to somebody, and then you've got to live with that grief
Yeah.
for the rest of your, or an argument or something, or that type of grief.
Right.
Right. Speak. I mean, how would you suggest persons handle that type of grief?
I think that that's just the complicated nature of being human.
Mhm.
And just the relationships and dynamics that we have with individuals. I can't think of anyone that I know of that may not have had a falling out with a person that they've loved deeply for whatever reason. Might have been an argument, and then due to some very unfortunate circumstances, since you use takeoff in this situation, was murdered, right? And something that could have been perhaps salvageable, time did not allow for something like that to happen. So there is a lot of the what ifs that happens.
Right.
It's a lot of the what ifs that happens. And that's a very difficult space to be in. That's a very difficult space to be in, because there's a lot of things that are left unsaid, and a lot of space between that's just really empty at this point.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a matter of, how do I manage the tension of sitting with not having resolved, or not being in a space to resolve some things with the individual while they were here, now that they're no longer here with us. And that will be a thing that we have to manage, but it doesn't have to be, it has to be reckoned with, but it doesn't have to be carried for the remainder of your life.
So I'm going to shift, and I'm going to ask you, and just to give you a second to think about it, I'm going to ask you, when should we be suggesting? And I'll tell you what I do.
Okay.
That persons go see mental health professionals. And if there were a couple of things that you would offer up to somebody who was grieving, what kind of steps would you offer up to them? I mean, and let's say they're not going to speak to a mental health professional. So one of the things that we do here, Reverend Butler and ourselves, Reverend Butler is also, background in social work, etc. One of the things that we are taught at the School of Theology at Virginia Union is to encourage people to seek out mental health professionals. If you are working, and I'm almost assured that you probably have access to mental health, some type of support financially from mental health professionals. And a lot of times we just don't know what to ask, or we won't ask. But the same way you go to the doctor and get your physical health checkups, in the same way people encourage you to go to the gym at the beginning of the year to work out and get your physical straight, you need to be making sure that you're doing the same thing with your mental and your emotional. And it is very important as it relates to your spiritual as well.
Yeah.
Because, you can pray, but there's some things that you need to be looking at and working on for yourself that I think will help impact your spiritual life and make it even better. And so we encourage strength. I know in the Black church, almost to a fault, so you just carry it, carry that burden, or take it, I know I grew up in a family where you didn't really talk about your stuff outside the house.
That's right.
And that was, we could have all kinds of it. I'm not saying that's what happened in my house, but what I'm saying is we encourage folk in the Black community, keep that stuff inside the house. And it could be all kinds of hell breaking out inside the house.
Right.
That is unhealthy for you.
Right.
And then you end up becoming a part of that unhealthy cycle. And it does not encourage communication. It does not encourage you stepping away to take an inventory of your own mental and emotional stock so that you can do the best things for yourself so that while you're doing the best things for yourself, it can help you be better for the community.
Right.
So I think I got it, but just the stigma within our community. And even though I think we're breaking it to a certain degree, there still is a stigma about seeking support from those who are professionally trained in dealing with emotional and mental health.
Yeah. I think that we are starting to hit the tip of the iceberg. Collectively, mental health is in the Black community, at least how I see it. And by no means am I aficionado on all things Black. This is just a conversation that we're just starting. We are probably I'm 44. Don't have a problem telling my age at all. I'm 44. I'm probably one generation removed from the generation that didn't talk about anything. And I'm talking about my parents' generation. And then my grandparents' generation, that's completely unheard of, right? So this notion of mental health, mental wellness, self-care is a foreign concept even to those who have parents that are within my age group. But I think that we're starting to normalize that a little bit. I think what's also happening is that, which is in a way kind of a good thing that's happening, is that we can't hold the there's kinks in the armor that are starting to show, as they should, because the human body and the human mind isn't meant to take on the things that we've dealt with as Black people individually and collectively in silence. Those things need voices. Those things need space. They need space to be witnessed. And that's really how I look at when I'm working with my clients in my office, is that the concept of what people think therapy isn't really what you think it is. I think for me, I see it as a space where you can come and bear witness to some things that have taken place. And even just opening up the capacity and space allows you to heal, because you're getting it out of your body in that way. But the stigma is still there. I think a lot of that stigma has to do with the fact that we've taken on a lot of identities around celebrating strongness. And what that would mean for a lot of people, if I lose this identity of being strong, then who am I? Because I've spent my entire life being defined by this thing that's also silently killing me at the same time. There's really a strong mind-body connection to the lack of your mental health and how it impacts your physical body. The aches and pains that most people have aren't necessarily attributed to all things that's happening physically. What you don't tend to mentally will show up in your body. You will feel it. You can feel it here in your shoulders and your neck and your back and your knees. For women, we carry a lot of stress in our hips. And that's normally, if you're looking just at the somaticism of mental health, this is where we carry trauma, is in this space for us. So there's a whole mind-body connection that we can go into. I know this, we won't have space time to do that now, but you have to attend to that.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to move to wrap up, and I want you to share some things that people could do, if they're grieving, right now, just some things that they can do that they don't even have to pull an insurance card out for, even though they need to do that part of it. If you take a second, particularly if you want to talk about connecting to, so I was talking about to somebody and just talking about the cycle of loss that has happened in my family. And I was using my mom as an example. Her mom died 12 years ago, right? Went into the hospital, was having some problems with her heart, chest. 3 weeks later, after a triple bypass, was dead. You know what I'm saying? Pretty much collapsed in her arms and died. Then 10 years after that, which is 2 years ago now, literally about 2.5 years ago, younger sister had pancreatic cancer. Fought the good fight for 2 years, passed. In the midst of my dad, wrestling with dementia for 4 years and then passing. I said all that to say is having conversation that we celebrate the strongness of it. We thought we did anyway, but that's a lot of grief.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a lot. Significant relationships, significant persons who have passed and who have gone. And I'm certain that as we begin to think about our own lives, we need help getting through that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And we need, we need to be able to, and that's just the loss of family. That's not the loss of a relationship, a marriage, or a dating relationship, or a job,
Yeah.
or a significant friendship.
Yep.
All of that stuff impacts you. And during this season, sometimes we see it. That's why there's this thing called Blue Christmas that some folk wrestle with during this time of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're having this conversation today because we understand it's significant, and there is help that is out there. All right. So I don't want to be biased, but I will. We got two persons here. Last time I checked, both of them was booked up, but you can check.
Yes.
And you see them on a Sunday, pull them aside. I need some help, because even if they can't, they can try to send you to the right place.
Yeah.
But you don't need to be going through some of the stuff on your own. So if you had a closing message, what would it be for persons who may be dealing with grief right now, may not even know they're grieving?
Slow down and allow yourself to catch up with everything that's been taking place in your life over the past couple months, weeks, years.
And that's two words: slow
down.
So as we're wrapping up, what would you suggest? And adding anything that's not death related. And I feel like I mentioned this already before, but like loss of a job, loss of a boyfriend or girlfriend, or anything that's not grieving related to death. Just as we close this out, what would you just say generally people can do in relationship to grief?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, slow down, catching up with yourself, just kind of getting an assessment about where you are emotionally is a big thing. Even if it's just a loss of like a job or a significant other or a relationship, for a person that's still living, the process of grief is still the same because it's still a loss. So just slowing down and giving yourself enough time to feel the impact and the weight of having your life changed in that way is one of the first things that I can tell anybody. That's even before you step into a therapist's office. Slow down, see where you are. You might notice that being hyper vigilant is also a form of grief as well too, because you're constantly keeping yourself busy and you're not giving yourself the opportunity to process actually what's going on. Or you can become very hypo, which is kind of like the downside of things, where you're not getting dressed, you're not getting out of the bed, you're not tending to your what we call are the activities of daily living, like bathing, washing, grooming, all of those things. I know within our community, it does have a tendency to show up where busyness doesn't look like grief, but it can actually really be grief, just disguised in a really different way. So just slowing down enough to see, where am I? Am I swinging high one way in this way, or am I really low in this other way? And just kind of assessing where you are in that space.
One of the things the scriptures call us to do is to be together as brothers and sisters, and to look out for each other. I am, as your pastor, encouraging you, though, to take it a step further. And if you are grieving, if you do need to talk to somebody, one of the best decisions of your life is to reach out to your insurance companies or whoever and find out what accessibility you have for services that tend to your mental and your emotional. You're going to thank me later if you do that. And I think that could be a helpful thing during this season. All right. And especially as you wrap up the year and move into 2023. Now, let's try something different if you haven't tried it already. We want to thank our guest today, Ms. Charlie Pleasant, who has taken some time to be with us today. And, look her up. You know, you see what kind of services she offers. She may be somebody that you may need to reach out to, and if you can't, then she can connect you to somebody else. All right. For those of you who are watching, if you're watching at 12 and 6:30, 12 or 6:30, and you know we're getting ready to do the after Bible study chat. And so jump on 804-203-9011, meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. Unfortunately, this is our last Wednesday of the year. All right. And so we got 2 Wednesdays after the 21st and the 28th. Take some time on those Wednesdays, read some scripture, listen to some music, go for a walk, do some meditation, do something during this time, during the time that we normally would be having better Bible study, make you a better person. Jump on afterward, and we'll be there to try to answer any questions or have further dialogue. Thank you. God bless y'all. Take care.